Namaste, ladies and gentlemen. When it comes to clinical trials, we've heard about pilot studies, we've heard about pivotal studies, post-market studies, we've heard about cohort studies, single-arm studies, control trials, randomized trials, and you may have also heard of adaptive trials, trials with crossover features. Now, I realize here I've painted medical device trials with a very broad brushstroke. The type of study really depends on the pre versus post-market status of the study, the aims of the effort, and the corresponding geography-specific regulatory requirements. The key point to appreciate is that the nuts and bolts of this effort lies in the actual trial design. Now, trials can fail due to multiple reasons. Sometimes they fail because the design was too esoteric or challenging from an execution perspective. Of course, this needs to be avoided given that a clinical trial is the most expensive and critical part of your design validation suite. I don't need to say that. That's well understood. Now, to discuss key considerations for clinical trial designs, I have with me my colleagues Cari Kniola and Guido Rieger, veterans of the design and conduct of several clinical trials. And I also have a very special guest in our biostatistician, Rolf Hövelmann, to help appreciate the stats aspect of clinical trials. So let's get started with the first question. Cari, the first question is coming to you. Now, we're all aware that the clinical trial design can make or break a study. It's always easier to determine and demonstrate correlation over causation. Therefore, a successful trial design must ensure that a treatment or a therapeutic effect can be isolated by addressing and mitigating potential confounding factors, foreseeable biases, and possible variations. Now, bearing in mind the 4 stages of the clinical study that are design, conduct, analysis, and reporting, Cari, what are the top barriers to effective clinical trial design?
Well, I think some of the biggest barriers, and it seems I don't know, really straightforward, but it's making sure you take that end goal of what you're going for in mind, both for your product and for the study itself. For your product, if it's already on the market and this is, you're collecting registry data, that's something completely different than if you have a product that you are just doing your first in human study with, or you're ready to go to your pivotal trial. Mm-hmm. So knowing that, that big picture and which direction you're going and what the ultimate purpose of that trial is obviously step one. But where that really comes into play, especially with your, first in human, your pivotal trials, when you're really looking at getting that product to market, is looking at that end picture of your product and who the users are going to be, what type of facilities you're going to be using this device in, what countries you're going to be trying to go to market in, and taking all of that and putting that into your design, because the data that FDA wants may be a little bit different than the data that you need for reimbursement, may be a little bit different than the data that you need for your European approval. So it really, understanding your ultimate goal and making sure every step of the way you are taking those goals into account when you're designing your study is a huge, huge first step that will put you on the road to success.
Excellent points. Guido, any thoughts?
Well, in my opinion, I'm a physician by background, so I have a clinical view of things, and I think it is essential that you include clinical expertise right from the beginning of the trial design, so that you have the proper key opinion leaders involved, but also other subject matter experts. So you are designing, let's say, for the clinical routine, and that sometimes is not done because if you just take a strictly statistical or regulatory approach, you might miss the boat, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I've seen so many trials where on paper, it is exactly what you want. You've got the perfect patients, you've got the perfect, perfect enrollment criteria, you've got all of these steps. And then when you go to actually start the study, the sites are like, this is not going to work because this is not how it works in real life. This isn't how we see these patients. This isn't how these patients work. And when you introduce too many confounding factors like that and take people away from their everyday experience, it introduces lots of room for missing things and sometimes really important things. And, sometimes looking for that perfect patient means you get no patients because there's so few people that fit into that box that you've just written yourself out of a study looking for that perfect patient. So Guido's absolutely right. You need those people to give you that real life, this is going to work, this is not going to work scenario.
Sometimes the design can be a little too esoteric. Patient population is a little rarefied to be practical. Any thoughts on KOL and SMEs?
Yes, absolutely. So, this we're getting now, we're going down the right way. And usually, the study sponsor, so from our point of view, the customer, as a CRO, he's our customer. So the sponsor will usually be working with KOLs already. And probably it's actually some very specific KOLs, maybe in one country, maybe in a certain primary care center. I'm not primary care center, the university kind of setting. So the opposite of primary care. And the sponsor will have the subject matter experts, and also he will definitely have the most detailed knowledge of the product. And probably the study indication, so the patient population which the study should include, which the product is designed to address. And there is a problem with this, and because he's so involved and with the topic and very much into the weeds in the details, this can lead to so-called expert blindness, which means he may be too far into the details, as Cari was saying, and therefore it does make sense to take a step back and in this case probably have a more neutral, experienced clinical expert who can assess this, but he's not so involved in the topic, and he will automatically take a step back and ask some key questions to the sponsor and say, okay, why have you done it this way, or why are you including these patients, why are you excluding certain other patients, and that way you can make sure that he assists the sponsor with aligning the studies or the study's design actually with the perceived goals the sponsor has. So the sponsor will have certain goals, as Cari is mentioning. Probably it's approval, maybe reimbursement. And that is logical, but he may have designed the study in a way that's not quite appropriate or effective. And likewise, the statistics also need to be appropriate to the actual question the sponsor wants to address, which is also logical, but often it can be statistically correct, but miss the objectives by not being clinically appropriate. And I could give a very brief example of this. Recently, a sponsor approached us with a study protocol, and we were asked to implement this. And when looking at the protocol, we saw three potential issues. So it was a single center study, which is not such a problem. It was definitely powered correctly, so statistically it was okay. But it was also there was no control, which could be an issue. And the main problem we actually saw was that the study population was overly restrictive. And this was due to the clinical practice of this KOL the sponsor was working with. So he was defining his patients in a very specific way, which was not really reflecting the general population. So we asked the sponsor these questions, and he came back and said, okay, we have talked to our KOL and we are widening the indication. Mm-hmm. It was kept single arm for good reasons. Some are ethical, some are also financial, of course. But also the number of sites was increased from 1 to 5, and it's now in 2 countries. So this way, the study is very much de-risked. And I mean, the approval is one thing, but we discussed specifically the reimbursement, which will not be very easy to get if you just have study from one center. So in this way, we were able to help the sponsor with that study design.
Excellent points, both Cari and Guido. And I think the viewpoint in terms of not to ignore the reimbursement aspect of things, along with, the ensuring a successful outcome for your trial and regulatory approval, that reimbursement piece is absolutely critical. Otherwise, you just don't get paid down the line. Rolf, I'd like to move on to you for my next question. And I'd like to understand, what are your thoughts on effective trial design from a biostatistics perspective?
Yes, of course, it is very important to choose the best study design possible for each study. And the study design must be chosen so that as many open questions as possible can be answered. The effort involved in the respective methods and the feasibility must also be considered so that an implementable concept is created during planning. For example, it should be checked whether it is possible or not to have an adaptive clinical trial for this study. And adaptive clinical trials have a lot of advantages, but you have to check if the study we are talking about is suitable for such a design. And therefore, I think the study design should be determined jointly by the sponsor and the study statistician.
Okay, great. Now, Rolf, in your experience, what are some device types that lend themselves more to a traditional design versus what are some of the others that, manufacturers may have more success from an adaptive standpoint? Just trying to tap into your experience here.
Yeah, adaptive, you have to check what is the primary endpoint. When is the primary endpoint? The time point. Is it late in the study? What is the recruitment speed? If you have already included or recruited all the patients after 3 months, then you can't make an adaptive trial of this. So there are a lot of aspects you have to consider if it is possible to have the study as an adaptive study or as a normal study.
Okay, great. You know what? I'd like to invite you all, as well as the audience, to a part 2 of this discussion, because we have examples to cover, we have regulatory and ethical aspects to cover, and then some more aspects as far as the specifics of clinical trial design are concerned. So I'd like to thank Cari, Guido, and Rieger, and I'd like to invite all 3 of them, as well as you all, to part 2, because we're going to keep this discussion going. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Goodbye, everybody.